life is designed in a way wherein change, whether you like it or not, is something that you're going to have to deal with. It's that simple, right? Change is the only constant. Either you sign up for it or it drags you.
You can choose to remain ignorant about the things that you should be vulnerable to, whether that's a toxic behavior, a toxic trait, but externally, the universe will let it be known to you until you learn that lesson, until you become aware, right? And that's the difference between something in the unconscious or the subconscious and then it emerging to be known. If you don't do it and your best self is right on the other side of that, 100% the universe will let it be known to you. It's gonna hit. It's gonna quite literally either sweep you away or hit you on the head with a hammer until you get it.
Yeah. All right, Nikos. So I attended a workshop that I wanted to share with you 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
So 2 weeks ago, let's call it a leadership workshop with a flavor of the art of facilitation. So this workshop was in Dubai. I'm really grateful that I didn't have to fly for the workshop. We had people, I mean, it was incredibly diverse. We had people from Australia, Germany. We had someone from Brazil. We had some boys from Pakistan. And we started in this room. And, you know, the facilitators prompted us to share why we were there. And then the second question, which really broke the ice, was, you know, what are you most apprehensive about going into this 4 days of training? And that really broke the ice. And then we led, or that followed with a nice dinner. And the next day, bright and early, 8 a.m., they introduced the first concept. And the first concept that they introduced was the idea of 5%. Have you heard of the idea of 5%?
I've heard of it, but don't really know too much about it.
Okay, so the premise is this 95-5%, right? So let's talk about the 95%. Right? So the 95% of your life are things that you share with everyone around you, your friends, your family, your partner, right? Social media. It's the data, the details of the narrative, right? It's what you want others to hear and believe about you. Now, the flip side is the 5%. And the 5% is let's call it the inside story. It's your dreams. It's your concerns, your fears. It's what matters most to you and why it's significant. So it's what worries you. It's what excites you. It's, you know, your feelings and all the complexity that comes with it. Now, the idea is that we don't discuss our 5% with people around us. We discuss, you know, if you were to visualize an iceberg, right? What you see on top, like above the surface, is the who, the when, the what, the where, right? That's the visible part. But that's only really 20%, right? Who said what, where it was said, you know, all the details, the data essentially. But we know that what you see is just 20%. 80% of that iceberg sits under the water. And that is really the emotion, right? The body sensations, the feelings, the inner desires, the core needs, your beliefs, your values, what triggers you, what your tension points are. And all of that really leads to your core struggle, right? The inner struggle. So they asked us to basically, and when you talk about your 5%, what happens is you start this process of self-discovery and you start realizing things about yourself that you were unknown to you. You were blind to a lot of that because it's something that we haven't discussed. We haven't really explored, right? So to get clarity and to really reveal the inner struggle, we have to lean into that 5%. Right? To really capture that meaningful, the significant, let's call it the unresolved. Because the idea is that we don't really learn from, you know how this saying, you know, we learn from experience. You've heard that saying before, right? We learn from experience, but in reality, we actually don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on the experience. So it started off by them asking us to do an exercise. They said, okay, we want you to do an exercise where we want you to write down everything that happened in the last 30 days. So, everyone started writing. I closed this deal. In my case, I went to Everest Base Camp with the family. I am training for an Ironman. You are in the process of building Dial In, right? What else has happened for you in the last 30 days?
Yeah, just being in the grind and the thick of it. It was Jordy's birthday recently, which was mellowed out on a personal front, relative to the big extravagant trips that we're used to. Just because I've been on the grind, she's been less active due to some of the things that I've mentioned before. Lots of reflection and just like gearing up for App Store, gearing up for our seed round, standing up the nonprofit. So just mostly, I'd say it's 95% work related, but I see where you're going with this. The 5% of the filtered experience of how those things are going with respect to how I'm
Exactly.
reflecting on that experience. Yeah.
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 So we all wrote, everything that's happened, the 95%. And then they asked us, step 2 was to pick one of these events, one of the things that happened in the last 30 days. And they asked us to share a story about the vulnerability around that thing. And what was really interesting have you heard of the Johari window? So think of the Johari window in 4 quadrants. It's, the first quadrant are things that right? It's things that and things that other people know about you, right? It's basically the known. But the 5% are things that that others don't know, right? It's that facade, it's the mask, it's the front that we put up. But when we actually start peeling the layers of that 5%, we get into what is known as the concealed. It's things that we know about ourselves that others don't know about us. And what happens when we push down into that second quadrant, we open up this other aspect of the Johari window, which is the things that you don't know about yourself, the blind, like the part that's blind to you. And as you push into that window, you start opening the 4th quadrant, which are things that you don't know and others don't know about you, like the unknown. And the reason this is significant is because our potential sits in the unknown. Because if you know about your potential, then you're already perhaps living your potential. It's things that you already know about yourself, right? Or that other people know about you. And so they come to you for counsel, or if you're a member of a team, they know that, okay, Nikos is really well versed in simplifying really complex ideas, right? It's known. But what do other people not know about you? And that is also unknown to you, right? That's the unknown. That's where that potential exists. So that was really the key driver, or the aspect of this that we were trying to uncover, is the unknown. And of course, then it comes down to really discover the unknown, you have to be vulnerable, right? So they asked us to basically pick one thing that happened and to really share 3 feelings around that. What were 3 emotions that you felt from that experience? And then you move on to the next step, which is, okay, so we have the headline, we've picked the 3 feelings. Now, why was that significant to you? Why was it significant? So I'll give you an example. So one of my shares was, the feelings were, I'm feeling optimistic, I'm feeling proud, I'm feeling valued. I'm also feeling relieved and empowered. And the situation was that I hired someone from my team who I thought was a bad hire. And so the significance of that was that I quickly jumped to the conclusion that it was my judgment that was flawed. And the significance of that was I was really hard on myself. And the significance of that was that I've gotten much better on not blaming myself. I was hard on myself, but I got better not blaming myself for it. But then I realized that the pattern still exists because my first initial reaction was being really hard on myself. And the significance of that was this is not really about judgment. I thought it was about judgment. What I really learned was that this was about expectation. And what I learned about myself in that process of asking myself, why is this significant? Is because how often am I, or in my relationships, how often in my relationships do I have friction because I have not set the right expectations? And I discovered that when I have friction in my relationships, either with my kids, my spouse, partners, colleagues, freelancers, it's because I haven't set the right expectation. And I learned that about myself by peeling the layers.
There's so much there. Can I go back to one of your earlier points around discovering the unknown? Because this is a big one
Yes.
for me as well to reflect. There's reflecting on the experience after you've had the experience. There's the direct experience of feeling the emotion when you're having the experience. And then there's the post game that you've mentioned before. How does that discovery process work, and how does it crystallize into something that you're like, oh wow, I didn't know that I was prolific at, or I could be prolific at whatever it is, guitar, or being a leader, somebody
Yeah.
that was never outspoken before and now they're like leading a team. So things like that you're like stepping into the void. So what's different about this that gave you the aha moment versus all of the other leadership principles that you've kind of accumulated before in the past? Because this seems very new.
I mean, in this example, in this specific example, in the past, that's where I would stop. I would stop as at, there I go again. I did not do the due diligence in hiring the right individual. This person is not the right hire. Why did I not go? Like, I end up becoming really hard on myself for not doing the due diligence. But what I discovered was that it wasn't actually about the due diligence. I did the due diligence. I've known that about myself. I've overcome that pattern. This was something much deeper. This was about not setting the right expectation. And then I asked myself, well, where else am I not setting the right expectation? Or where else do I have friction? And is it because I have friction there because I haven't set the right expectation? And it led me to discover or self discover that that's exactly why. It's not about the first initial evidence or the first pattern. It's actually a much deeper pattern that I discovered. It was an unknown to myself.
Not to get super meta about this, but how often have you set expectations and those same expectations get thrown out of the window because either circumstances have changed or market conditions have changed or you've changed as an individual, or the same criteria that you've had for an individual may not be the same criteria anymore? Because I'm learning as I kind of roll my sleeves back up, and in this wonderful startup world that we're in, things are always changing. And the more that you define things, you often get into trouble because of the fact that so there's a degree to chaos that you need to manage and control. And of course, if you don't set expectations, then it's hard to get everybody on the same page and align to outcomes and kind of row in the same direction. But I'm experiencing this right now in Dial In, that it's a hard expectation to set when you're moving in so many different directions, and how to prioritize those things, right? But back to you, how often are you finding yourself like questioning those initial expectations, or are you finding that like, okay, well, it's fairly consistent, and I can set those expectations, it's not a matter of judgment anymore, it remains to be tried and true, and I could implement some form of discipline around expectation setting?
I think I mean, because change is constantly, it's the only constant. And so our expectations shift. But here it was more of a question of, I took the blame on judgment rather than really truly understanding what was creating this recurring pattern in my life. It was my avoidance of having that conversation of what the expectation is,
Got it.
or just making the assumption that the other person knows what I expect of them.
Okay, so there was. Is it appropriate to say that you've had less awareness than you have now as to setting expectations and jumping to judgment more often? Because like you're obviously like very hard on yourself. Like if I know you very well, it's the strive to be the improved, the best version of yourself. So you're quick to judge yourself more than anybody else, right? But kind of skipping the step of setting expectations, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I have this tendency to be hard on myself, but that pattern is a pattern that I've overcome, but there's residue that still exists. But that's on the surface. It's actually not that anymore, is what I've discovered here, is that it's masquerading as that, but it's actually something else. And that's the beauty of this 5% approach, is asking yourself, okay, well, why is that significant? What's the significance of that? And really going deeper into the self-discovery process to really get to the core struggle. Because
I love
oftentimes
this.
when we're on the
Yeah.
surface, we're quick to say, okay, that's it, that's the pattern, but that's an old pattern. Like, I'm not hard on myself the way I used to be. I still am. It's definitely something that I'm continuing to work on, but that's not the headline struggle in this situation. That's like a third order, you know, struggle. It's a struggle on the fringes. It's not a struggle at the core.
Yeah. This is a super interesting one. And I'm glad you said go deeper because culturally, we've been dealing with a lot of these issues at Dial In because we do things very differently. And what I'll say about unpacking the unknown and kind of doing the work. So we're obviously very cognizant of doing the work in terms of being aware of what best foot we put forward to people, or almost like we're posturing. Like most of the time we're posturing. Like we're telling stories and we're meaning makers in sharing narratives of how we want the world to see us based on the best
Mm,
version of ourselves. And we use that
exactly.
Instagram analogy a lot. But the 5%, it's almost like you're diving into the void with nothing to grasp on if you don't create space for something that you're not today. Let me say that a different way. So the 5% that you don't know that you're capable of being a good leader. You don't know if you're capable of reaching the next level of physical capabilities in being a triathlete. You don't know until you try, until you set an intention for something that you are not today, right? And that creates space for something else, right? It's not, but you need that space created. Like you need to, there needs to be like, and you've heard me say this before, it and not it, right? Like I am not this today. I am not Elon Musk today, but I have to believe that I could do something as audacious as putting a spaceship out into space, or terraforming Mars, or terraforming the Earth into something that is prosperous and sustainable for the next 10,000 years, and really creating space for something that you're not. And so for me, the 5% is far more significant because the 5% can turn into 5,000% if that
Exactly.
space is created, right? Because if you
Exactly.
just step out into the void, you're like, yeah, well, I don't know. I could be a football player. I could be this. I could be that. It's just like, what am I grasping toward? So that becomes framed up much differently when you recognize, a vision of yourself that you'd like to see. But my suggestion would be, don't just set it at where you are like 5 years from now. Like really push the boundaries of like a full transformation. Like what does that actually look like, um, to to audaciously solve all of the biggest problems in the world, right? Like really
Mm.
sky's the limit. Like, and I go back to the Everest episode of you are unlimited. You can continuously unlock your potential. How unlimited are you? It's really up to you. So yeah, I love where this is going with that 5% because it could unlock so much.
Yeah, it's that level of self-awareness, right? And really getting to the core of, okay, well, what's the belief, right? If you feel you're not that kind of leader, what's the belief? Because if you believe that you're not that kind of leader, then the opposite is equally true. And so asking yourself, well, what's the significance to you? Why is it important? As I went through that process of, okay, why is this significant? It was a bad hire. I questioned my judgment, but why is that significant? Right? And I kept peeling the layers till I landed on something that was not in my conscious awareness. It was something that I had to discover by going through this process. And a big part of that self discovery is obviously asking yourself that question, right? What do I what is actually going on here? Is it really what I think is going on, right? In terms of, the first level, right? In my case, the first level was a pattern that no longer existed. And I realized that it wasn't actually that. It was something completely different. And I realized something about myself, which now becomes a skill or a discovery that allows me to unlock my next level. Because now the awareness of, okay, I'm not really setting right expectations here, right? By setting the right expectation, now I'm taking my relationships, my interactions to a whole new level. And so I'm empowering people around me in ways that I was not able to.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did this land with the rest of your cohort
It
in this
was,
event?
it was, oh my, it was a really, and another thing is, there are two reasons, and we shared or we spoke about this in a previous episode. There are two reasons why we don't go into our 5%, right? First is fear of judgment. If I tell you my deepest vulnerability, like, you may judge me. And the second is discretion. So in this environment, right from, before we even got out of the gates, there was this implicit and explicit understanding and commitment to each other that everything that was going to be shared in the room stays in the room, and there was absolutely no judgment. Have you ever walked into a room where you just feel like there's absolutely no judgment? No judgment whatsoever. It's really powerful. Have you felt that?
No, and I don't know if that's, and there are probably rooms where there was absolutely no judgment, but a lot of this I'm making up, right?
It's
Um,
self-judgment.
yeah, it's self judgment. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I feel
Yeah.
I'm projecting that onto the room where,
Of
people
course.
either don't judge or it's mostly they maybe don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the reality, is most of the time people don't really care, right? They don't care what you had for lunch. They don't care where you went on holiday. I mean, people don't really care. People are too busy, with their own lives, right? But then we create this whole construct and we end up projecting. And so, but going to your question about what was it like for everybody else, it was such a powerful experience for every individual that was there. Just knowing that there's full discretion and that there was no judgment really unlocked parts of everyone's psyche that really opened up the fourth quadrant of that window, the Johari window, which was the unknown. And they started discovering aspects about themselves that they didn't know existed. And that was really, really powerful. So this 5% concept is something that I'm really excited about. That's why I was like, Nikos, we've got to do an episode on this experience that I just had, because it was so powerful.
It's good.
And
It's good, and it's hard. It's a hard one too, because where I go with this is on judgment, because I've had some challenges with judgment. As aware as I am, the mind still is very fickle, and you go back to different forms of judgment, and it's hard to surrender fully. And I have limits to how much I can surrender. And if you're, going full blown Michael Singer, it's really difficult for entrepreneurs to completely let go of outcomes, right? And I'm often finding that, I can say that I'm spiritual, but is there kind of a universal principle that applies to all things? Like, can you be an entrepreneur and not care about outcomes? I'd say that that's very difficult. Michael Singer found a way to create $1 billion organization by pure surrender, right? Where he was in the moment every single day and decided not to dial in those specific preferences that he had. And so preferences are a form of judgment. Something happened to me today that I'm now applying a filter to, and I'm saying, this could have gone better. Why? The conversation with your employee could have gone better because I needed to set expectations. I didn't do the right thing because I didn't set the right criteria. I didn't put this on the CV that I needed, or the job description that I needed, or this person doesn't meet the right kind of qualifications. What's funny is when you go down this path and you realize everything is a construct, everything is mental. We're making all of this up as we're going along, right? We're just completely making all of this up. And it's like, okay, well, and this is where it gets dangerous, because it's like, okay, now we're living in a world of postmodernism. Then what do you grasp as truth? Like, you need some type of consensus around what is real, what is true, the nature of reality, what is fact versus subjective truth. So it's a very slippery slope, and it's one that I've been struggling with. But going back to, there's no way to tie a perfect bow around this, because it's a very intellectual conversation around what is truth, what is your truth, and to what degree does judgment and your preferences impede upon direct experience, optimal experience, and flow. Because if we're constantly putting these mental filters on, right, then we're always judging. And we're always like, oh yeah, well, that could have been better. Well, I'm not this, I'm not that. Then we're back to everything that you talked about in the previous episode, which is external measurements for internal things, that it should just be a direct experience.
Yeah. Would you say, how does this resonate for you? Would you say that the truth reveals itself when you're truly open and willing to be vulnerable? When you're embracing vulnerability, that's when the
Yes,
truth
I would
reveals itself.
I would agree with that. And again, I'm just meaning making here. There is, in order to truly surrender, you have to make yourself vulnerable.
Yeah.
And by making yourself vulnerable, you have to peel all of the layers of everything that you are creating mental constructs around, and literally just be like, okay, well, what's landing in front of me that perhaps the greater good, the universe, God, whatever you'd like to call it, is putting in front of me as a message that is conveying something that I didn't know about myself before. So yes, you
Yeah.
100% have to be vulnerable.
And let's get a little tangible with that, right? When you say things that that you have to embrace, like when you say vulnerability, right? What are we really talking about? We're talking about our dreams, our aspirations, like how we feel about it, like our core needs, what our values are, those beliefs that are limiting that we've talked about over and over again. Like that's really what allows us to really get to the core struggle that prevents us from really stepping into our potential. Because the whole premise of this is, how do we unlock our potential? How do we actually push to the fourth quadrant of that window to really unlock the unknown, right? Because everything that we already know already exists, and those are the beliefs and the feelings and the emotions. But what is the core struggle that's really preventing us from discovering our true potential?
Yeah, that's oof. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but you're absolutely right about vulnerability. You're absolutely right about putting yourself out there and telling the world what you really desire for yourself, especially if those things are not materialized today, right? Because that creates the space. That creates the space for exactly like what you want to become. And when you put it out there, whether it's a song or a poem or a company or a podcast or whatever idea out there, you risk not just self judgment, but you start adhering to those same measurement constructs that everybody measures you by. Oh, it's supposed to
Mm.
go this way. Or there's somebody wrote a book on this. Oh, well, product market fit is supposed to go this route. Oh, well, your seed round was bigger than mine. Like whatever that is, it becomes a measurement. And that's where it becomes very difficult because we're in a world full of measurement and boxes and judgment and external factors that are supposed to determine how you feel inside. But we're finding that a lot of these contracts are starting to melt away and they are just not working for what we need in the future.
Very true. I, another 5% that came up for me was that, you know, I felt that whenever I'm on stage, I feel like I'm not, or when I'm with a group of people, and this is something that goes back to childhood programming, I felt like I'm not able to truly connect. I don't feel like people are able to connect with me, and I'm not able to connect with them. This was a belief that I've had. And in this 4 days we each had to basically do a role play, and as I'm role playing over and over and over again, and I'm getting, we divided the group into subgroups, and so everyone saw everyone present. And the feedback that I kept getting over and over and over again was how I felt, or I was coming across as someone very relatable and they could connect with very easily. And so that opened up this window of something that I didn't know, but it was something that other people knew, right? So it was blind to me. And when that opened up, I realized that if I'm able to connect, then I'm able to actually lean into that and really unlock things that I didn't know about myself, which was, that ability to connect. And now if I'm able to connect and I no longer have that inner chatter going on, how else can I amplify, or would that then amplify my message to the world, or to,
Oh
you know
yeah.
a group of people? And so that helped me, getting really leaning into that 5%, uncovered this belief and disproved it based on something that was blind to me, something that I wasn't seeing accurately.
Let
And so
me
it goes back to what you said about accepting and just embracing it,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
acceptance, right?
Yeah, let me just go here for a second and just play minor contrarian in the room.
Let's go.
Is are there some cases in which ignorance is bliss? Like, what if you didn't do the work here? What if you don't care, or not that you don't care, but like, what if you didn't do the work to get to the 5%? Are there some cases in which you're better off not having this construct for tapping into the unknown, and it remains unknown, and you kind of go about your day and you're fine, you're happy, I don't need to be vulnerable? Or that, can you argue for or make the case for anyone that can stay in ignorance? Or is this kind of like a hard and fast rule or principle all people should abide by?
I think what you're saying, or the way I'm processing it, is if you're not curious about the unknown, then how are you really growing? How are you expanding? How are you discovering parts of yourself that you didn't know existed. And going back to, the premise of this, which was, how do you unlock your potential? You don't have to. I guess to answer your question, yeah, I mean, you don't have to. You can continue just sailing and operating by default rather than operating by design.
Yeah. Stay in the matrix.
And you can stay in the matrix. You could pick the analogy, the metaphor, staying in the matrix, sleepwalking. But most people who are listening to podcasts and are listening to us or reading the books, we're constantly trying to up level and be the best version of ourselves that we can be, right? That's really what life is about, right? It's about evolution, it's about growth, it's about expansion. I'll make the argument that we can step into it willingly, or it happens to us in ways that we did not expect. Because life is designed in a way wherein change, whether you like it or not, right, is something that you're going to have to deal with. It's that simple, right? Change is the only constant. Either you sign up for it or it drags you. So we were talking about this in the previous episode. There are 3 reasons why people change. It's because they find their purpose, and that purpose could be something as simple as having a growth mindset. Or the second reason, they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. They wake up, the same routine, and they're like, they want something new. They want something different. They want to feel alive. Or the third is because death is staring you in the face. But whatever the situation is, wherever you fall in those 3 different scenarios, you're going to have to change. Nothing remains static. So I'm going to argue that you can't be ignorant for too long. You may think that you are, but you're changing. We're all changing. Either we're aware of the change, we're conscious of it, or we're not, but we're changing.
What's funny about that is a lot of the Jungian psychologists have a model for this. When you can choose to remain ignorant about the things that you should be vulnerable to, whether that's a toxic behavior, a toxic trait, but externally, the universe will let it be known to you until you learn that lesson, until you become aware, right? And that's the difference between something in the unconscious or the subconscious and then it emerging to be known. If you don't do it and your best self is right on the other side of that, 100% the universe will let it be known to you. It's going to hit, it's going to quite literally either sweep you away or hit you on the head with a hammer until you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Because growth is directional and there's something intrinsic about it. And there's something that speaks to the more intangible things around destiny and purpose and growth in life. And it's the lotus flower inside all of us. And if you choose not to, then there's a directionality to this that I approached in my previous book around collective intelligence. And even though we can't achieve a state of perfection, the universe seems to want to push us toward removing imperfections. And so there's kind of this nature of growth and process of kind of the 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. And why we experience pain and suffering and all of those things is because we're slowly achieving a state of perfection as a whole, not just, as an individual, but like society as a whole.
Yeah. The second thing the second key takeaway for me from this workshop was around, so the first was about vulnerability. The second was around being able to truly listen. I thought I was a pretty good listener until I stepped into that room for 4 days and I realized that there's so many levels above. Oftentimes I'm listening and I'm trying to solve, I'm trying to fix. So I'll be listening to you. You call me and say, I've got this problem and I'm trying to solve it and I'm trying to fix it and I'm looking at angles. Can I connect it to this person? Or how can I draw from my experience? How is this related to something that I went through? But oftentimes, to really be able to help someone overcome a situation that they're facing, you just have to actively listen. Like you just have to really lean into that quiet mind, right? Just quieting the mind
Yeah.
and just truly listening. Resist solving. Just listen. Just listen. Like
Yes.
just with the quiet mind. And that was a big, huge learning for me from this workshop. And a part of active listening is reflecting back, right? Repeating what you hear, what you see, what you notice. So we had this situation wherein we had to practice this and we were put into triads. And I remember this one instance wherein it was so powerful. So I'm the coachee. I'm supposed to basically share some of the challenges that I'm going through. And the coach that I was paired up with, one of my peers, when we got into the pocket, Nikos, he basically looked at me in a way that I felt like he was looking at my soul. So present, I could feel the stillness of his mind. I could feel that every word that I was saying to him was going unfiltered, just going into him with no judgment, no intention to solve, no intention to fix, but to truly understand.
Wow.
And I took away a few questions, 2 questions specifically. The first was, how do you feel? How do you feel about that? So, how did that make you feel? And the second follow-up question to that is, tell me more. Tell me more. And in some ways, it actually ties back to the 5%. Because when you're asking someone to tell you more, they're actually able to go deeper into the iceberg, into the beliefs, into the emotions, into the feelings, into the core struggle. And I remember this one instance wherein I was getting really vulnerable and I started, messing around with this band that I have. And he looked at me, he's like, what's going on right now? Like, why are you playing with your band? And I didn't even realize that I was actually doing this. But
Nervous
because I
energy.
felt so vulnerable,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I noticed that you were doing that when you shared this.
Definitely. I love everything that you said. The exploration of what is unknown is newly tethered to what makes us vulnerable. And what makes us vulnerable is ultimately what creates the space for personal growth. And the aspect of this around active listening and just being in the present moment is just more prevalent than ever before. And I really appreciate the takeaways from this event that you have here. I definitely have lots of new ideas to meditate over and to really tap into what the 5% means for me and for you listeners out there in being passionate about your own growth and your own personal journey. It really is about that 5%. So very grateful for the discussion that we've had here, Dhiren. Really appreciate you sharing that.
My pleasure. All right. We will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you have enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you will join us for the next episode.